At 1 o'clock this morning, the New York City Police Department and the owners of Zuccotti Park notified protesters in the park that they had to immediately remove tents, sleeping bags, and other belongings, and must follow the park rules if they wish to continue to use it to protest. Many protesters peacefully complied and left. At Brookfield's request, members of the NYPD and Sanitation Department assisted in removing any remaining tents and sleeping bags. This action was taken at this time of the day to reduce the risk of confrontation in the park and to minimize disruption to the surrounding neighborhood. Protesters were asked to temporarily leave the park while this occurred and were told that they would be free to return to the park once Brookfield finished cleaning. We are now ready to reopen the park, but understand that there is a court order, which we have not yet actually received, enjoining us from enforcing Brookfield's rules, and so the park will remain closed until we can clarify that situation. But I want to stress that our intention was to reopen the park and to let people go in and express their First Amendment rights to protest or their First Amendment rights to just peacefully enjoy the park and say nothing. In the future, protesters and the general public will be welcome there to exercise their First Amendment rights and otherwise enjoy the park, but will not be allowed to use tents, sleeping bags, or tarps, and going forward must follow all park rules. The law that created Zuccotti Park required that it be open for the public to enjoy for passive recreation 24 hours a day. Ever since the occupation began, that law has not been complied with, as the park has been taken over by protesters, making it unavailable to anyone else. From the beginning, I've said that the city has two principal goals: guaranteeing public health and safety and guaranteeing the protesters' First Amendment rights. But when those two goals clash, the health and safety of the public and our first responders must be the priority. And that is why several weeks ago the city acted to remove generators and fuel that posed a fire hazard from the park. Over time, I've become increasingly concerned, as had the owners of the park, Brookfield Properties, that the occupation was coming to pose a health and fire safety hazard to the protesters and to the surrounding community. We have been in constant contact with Brookfield, and yesterday they requested that the city assisted in enforcing the no sleeping and camping rules in the park. But make no mistake, the final decision to act was mine and mine alone. The park has become covered in tents and tarps, making it next to impossible to safely navigate for the public and for first responders who are responsible for guaranteeing public safety. The dangers posed were evident last week when an EMT was injured as protesters attempted to prevent him and several police officers from helping a mentally ill man who was menacing others. As an increasing number of large tents and other structures were erected, these dangers increased. It has become increasingly difficult even to monitor activity in the park to protect the protesters and the public, and the proliferation of tents and other obstructions created an increasing fire hazard that had to be addressed. Now, some have argued to allow the protesters to stay in the park indefinitely. Others had suggested that we just wait for winter and hope the cold weather drove the protesters away. But inaction was not an option. We could not wait for someone in the park to get killed or to injure another first responder before acting. Others have cautioned against action because enforcing our laws might be used by some protesters as a pretext for violence. But we must never be afraid to insist on compliance with our laws. Unfortunately, the park was becoming a place where people came not to protest, but rather to break laws and in some cases to harm others. There have been reports of businesses being threatened and complaints about noise and unsanitary conditions that have seriously impacted the quality of life for residents and businesses in this now thriving neighborhood. The majority of protesters have been peaceful and responsible, but an unfortunate minority has not been. And as the number of protesters has grown, this has created an intolerable situation. No right is absolute, and with every right comes responsibility. The First Amendment gives every New Yorker the right to speak out, but it does not give anyone the right to sleep in a park or otherwise take it over to the exclusion of others, nor does it permit anyone in our society to live outside the law. There is no ambiguity in the law here. The First Amendment protects speech. It does not protect the use of tents and sleeping bags to take over a public space. Protesters have had 2 months to occupy the park with tents and sleeping bags. Now they will have to occupy the space with the power of their arguments. Let me conclude by thanking the NYPD, the FDNY, and the Department of Sanitation for their professionalism earlier this morning. I should also note that last night I spoke with Governor Cuomo to inform him of our course of action, and he offered any help if we thought it was needed. Thank you all, and I will be happy to take a question or two, sir.
Mayor, can you just go over with us, was there one or two incidents here just in the last couple of days that was an impetus to take this action? And also, given what you said about the First Amendment rights of these folks, do you feel badly at all that you had to take this action?
No, because I don't feel bad because they can come right back in. At least they could have until a few minutes ago when we believe an order was issued, which we will go to court this morning to clarify. Before this order was issued, we had every intent to let them right back in and to let them protest. I think you have to distinguish between what we're trying to do and what was done in many other places. In many places, they were prevented from going back in after the safety conditions were improved to protest. Quite the contrary. Here, we welcome them back in. If they want to protest, they have a right to do so. Brookfield Properties has a legal obligation, an agreement with the city to let them, and has said that they are happy to have them there to express their views. But that is not the same as taking over the park so that other people cannot get in and express opposing views or similar views or no views whatsoever. We do know of one incident with an EMS worker and police officers the other day. There have been a number of everyday small either accusations which are hard to prove when the police can't even get there to see what's really going on. And that's one of the reasons why we have laws on the books that require access for first responders and require a level of protection that the city's obligated to provide. Yes, sir.
A few days ago, you said you can't even hear the protests a block away.
That's correct.
That they were generally following the...
That's correct.
What happened in the last few days?
It's what has a block or two away, generally speaking, and there's always exceptions. There were allegations of people defecating in alleys. We, quite honestly, have a lot of police out there, and to the best of our knowledge, couldn't find anybody doing it. The noise a block or two away was certainly not offensive. You probably couldn't hear it. When the protesters marched someplace, generally they did comply with instructions from the police department how to do that legally. But at the site, they were violating Brookfield's property rights, and at the site, the safety and health conditions became intolerable. So the difference, when I talked about away from it, yes, that's true. But it's at the site, which is where we acted last night or early this morning, and the reason for it was what was occurring at the site. Yes, yes.
Mayor, I'm just wondering if, as they re-enter, if they do re-enter today, will they be searched? Will their backpacks be searched?
We are going to reserve the right, as we do at big public events, to either on a random basis or if there's suspicion that they may be carrying something that's prohibited, whether it's at a parade, at a concert in a park, or here, on a random basis we would do that. They cannot carry in big objects, tents and other things to set up and recreate the situation that became so intolerable. Sir?
When is the park reopening?
We had planned to open it at 8 o'clock this morning. We even said to the police to start letting them in. About 50 people went in, is my understanding, and then we are told that this judge has issued a restraining order. I don't think, as of 2 minutes ago, we had not been served with the order yet, but because we think that there is an order out there, we have reclosed the park, and we are asking the 50 people to leave. But it was our intention to open it at 8 o'clock this morning. I can't hear.
If there's a restraining order, who's against and why are you closing the park?
The order was from a judge We haven't seen the order. We haven't been served with it. The best course of action, we think, because there are laws in the books that we have to comply with, like security and safety and Brookfield's property rights. So we will go to court this morning, and it's our considered judgment that the best course of action is to leave it closed for the hour or two it takes to go to the park, because nobody wants to recreate a situation that, if the court does not rule that on appeal or the judge changes her mind, that we would have a similar kind of situation that would create a danger to public safety. Miss?
Everyone's questions today, so we'll take a couple more.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if you could talk to how long this operation was in the planning, how many police officers were involved, and if you could tell us about the arrest. Were there people?
There were, we think, about 200. I'll let Ray talk a little bit about it, but I think just under 200. Keep in mind, it's still early, and some arrests occurred off the site as opposed to on the site, so it's a question of definition. But there were people that left of their own accord. There were people that we gave them plenty of time to take their belongings. If they didn't take their belongings, the sanitation department, with the help of Brookfield, took them by truck. They're going to be up at 57th Street and the West Side Highway in a sanitation garage. If you had property that you didn't chose not to or didn't have a chance to remove, you can go there. You'll have to have identification, a photo ID. We'll identify the piece of property you think is yours. We'll tag it, and we'll wait and see if anybody else shows up also claiming ownership. And then in a day or so, we think we can pretty much straighten most of that out. Ray, you want to talk a little bit about
something about the operation, why you decided to go with the planning of it, how many police officers were involved?
Well, we try to stay away from specific numbers. There were several hundred police officers involved, obviously. We've had contingency plans to address the situation in the park for quite a while. They've been developed, they've been honed by our commanders, and so it was something that was just a question of implementing.
Yes, sir.
Can you speak about any possible injuries that happened during the arrest? I know Councilman Udon
if there were any, I think EMS provided medical assistance to 3 minor things and to a police officer who had heart palpitations, who I'm told is in the hospital and it seems to be doing okay. There was certainly no serious injuries that we are aware of. People that lay down on the ground, may have banged themselves, but I think there's no reports that I know of anything other than the kind of professionalism that you would expect from the world's greatest police department. Yes, sir.
Last night I witnessed numerous instances of credentialed media being prevented from doing the protest and eviction. Why did this happen?
The police department routinely keeps members of the press off to the side when they're in the middle of a police action. It's to prevent a situation from getting worse and to protect the members of the press who have the same rights as everybody else, for we have to provide protection, and we've done exactly that, sir.
Have you weighed the pros and the cons by prohibiting tenting, sleeping bags, and other ways these protesters to stay warm? If they remain resolute to stay through the winter, what about the risk of the cold setting in and people?
Well, there's always a risk of people sleeping outdoors, and our health department worries about that. Actually, it comes to focus mostly when you find homeless. There's about 2,500 people, as you know, that live on the streets of the city, way down from what it was 5 years ago, and it is actually a very low ratio, the lowest, I think, of any major city in the country. But we do worry about that. But that's not the issue here. We don't, as I said in my statement, we have an obligation to enforce the laws today to make sure that everybody has access to the park so everybody can protest. That's the First Amendment, and it's number one on our minds. We also have a similar, just as important obligation to protect the health and safety of the people in the park. Way in the back, sir, yes.
Mayor, in the initial weeks of the protest, the police officers were actually taking patrols within the park and taking down structures or tarps or tents, and they stopped doing that. And I was wondering why that was done. Why did they not keep it down as they were appearing?
It was really, we had delegated that job to Brookfield Properties people and to the sanitation department, and the police, I assume, just acted. If they had to remove people and they didn't know who was in the tent, they have to be able to get in there. But fundamentally, that was the division of labor, and I think once again you saw two city agencies and a little bit of the fire department through EMS working together, which is what you would expect them to do, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just curious, with the concern of the law, I'm carrying a tent, I'm carrying an umbrella, I'm carrying a sleeping bag. Until I open it up, what right does the police department have to stop me from entering the park if I haven't set this device for this?
Well, we could adopt that. Michael, you want to talk a little bit about that?
If there's reasonable suspicion that someone is going to violate the rules, the police have a right to inspect to be sure that the rules are not being violated. So if someone is bringing a tent on his or her back into the park and the rules prohibit a tent being in the park, the police certainly have a right to say we don't want to do it, particularly in light of the history of which we're all aware.
Let me just finish by saying here, let me just remind everybody, New York City is the city where you can come and you can express yourself. We have a history going back to the founding of this city of being open and welcoming. And what was happening in Zuccotti Park was not that. It had developed into a situation which was prohibiting a lot of people from expressing their views. Assuming the judge's order gets vacated, assuming it exists and then gets vacated, people will have the opportunity to do that here in ways that I'm not sure they have in other cities. They have a right to be safe, and they have a right to say what they want to say, and they don't have a right to keep others from saying what they want to say or not saying anything. That's exactly what's at stake here, and that's exactly why we acted. And I just once again wanted to thank the uniform agencies of this city who performed exactly the ways you would expect them. They are well trained, they are well led, they are dedicated men and women who want to keep this city open, and that's exactly what they did. Thank you very much.